Before I begin our discussion, I'd like to draw your attention to a quote by American novelist and supporter of disarmament and a nuclear weapons free future, Sir Jonathan Shell. His outstanding writings include The Fate of the Earth and The Time of Illusion. His final years were devoted to researching climate change. For an unfinished book, he gave the working title The Human Shadow. He said, every person is the right person to act, and every moment is the right moment to begin. As we have been campaigning in partnership with IPEN to raise awareness and take action on plastic waste and the toxic effects of plastic waste throughout its life cycle, let's begin to learn and hopefully act today. We have two speakers with us today, Mr. Mahesh Pandya sir and Arpita Bhagat ma'am. I'll just shortly introduce them to you all. Mahesh Pandya sir is an environmental engineer and the director of Paryavaran Mitra NGO, which is an observer organization to UNFCCC and UNEP, and has inspectional consultative status with the United Nations ECOSOC, that stands for Economic and Social Council. Since 1997, he has been the editor of the bi-monthly Gujarati magazine Paryavaran Mitra. He has attended 8 international UNFCCC COPs on climate change. In 2016, he delivered lectures at Washington, D.C. University and MIT in Boston. He is also a member of GAIA, that stands for Global Alliance for Alternative Incineration, IPEN, and Climate Action Network, and Break Free from Plastic. He filed a number of PILs at the High Court, Supreme Court, and National Green Tribunal on environmental policy changes. Now, I'll quickly introduce Arpita ma'am as well. Arpita Bhagat ma'am is the Plastic Policy Officer for Gaia Asia Pacific. Her work focuses on building members' capacities and engagement in global and national advocacy work for plastic production caps, supporting zero waste regulations, ensuring a just transition for waste pickers and workers, and phase out of false solutions. She has been managing public mobilization advocacy and movement building campaigns and programs across a range of subjects since 2012, including renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, climate resilient cities, and gender. She has worked for both international and Indian NGOs. Now that I have introduced everyone to our speakers, I would really appreciate if you could all join us in a brief poll to see where we stand in our awareness today. So I'll just start the poll and I'll hope that everyone joins in. Everyone kindly participate in the poll, please. Thank you, Maitri. I'm going to end the poll in 1 minute, so please everyone be quick and answer the questions. Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you, Saket. Yeah, so I am ending the poll now. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. So let's begin our discussion. And our first is a presentation for today by Mahesh Pandya sir. Sir, are you ready? I'm just gonna share it.
Hello,
Yes, sir.
Namaskar, and welcome to this webinar. Thank you, Priya, for inviting me for a lecture, and also my colleague Arpita also joined with me as a giving a talk on the sincere and serious issue about the plastic waste. Yeah, so today आज विश्व में दो अहम चिंताएं हो रही है, एक ग्लोबल वार्मिंग की और दूसरे प्लास्टिक पॉल्यूशन की। लेकिन मैं मानता हूं कि ये प्लास्टिक पॉल्यूशन भी एक रीजन है, एक क्योज है ग्लोबल वार्मिंग के लिए, तो उसकी चिंता करनी बहुत जरूरी है और पूरा विश्व इसमें जुटा है। अभी अभी लास्ट मंथ प्लास्टिक ट्रीटी के लिए पेरिस में एक मीटिंग हुई, इंटर गवर्नमेंटल नेगोशिएटिंग कमिटी 2 INC2 की। इसके बारे में बात बताऊंगा, लेकिन पहले हम भारत की बात करेंगे। इंडिया में क्या हो रहा है? इंडिया में सबसे पहले 2011 में एक रूल्स आया था, प्लास्टिक वेस्ट इन ब्रैकेट मैनेजमेंट एंड हैंडलिंग रूल्स 2011, और वो हमारा जो एनवायरमेंटल प्रोटेक्शन 1986 है, इसके अंतर्गत एक किया गया। इसके बाद नंबर ऑफ टाइम्स नए नए अमेंडमेंट होते रहे। फाइनली 2021 में भी उसमें हुआ और एक तरह से जागृति भी हुई। हमारे प्रधानमंत्री ने भी यूएन में जाके सिंगल यूज प्लास्टिक की बैन की बात की। 2 टाइम वो लोग, प्रधानमंत्री ने भी प्लास्टिक वेस्ट को अपने आप उठाया और एक संदेश भी दिया प्लास्टिक वेस्ट के बारे में। तो इंडिया इज ऑल्सो वेरी सीरियस अबाउट द प्लास्टिक वेस्ट, लेकिन इम्प्लीमेंट तो नहीं हो रहा है। हम देखते हैं कि स्वच्छ भारत अभियान का सेकंड फेज होने के बावजूद भी प्लास्टिक वेस्ट का हो नहीं रहा है, ऐसा लगता है, और लोग ये बोल रहे हैं। तो इसीलिए उसकी अवेयरनेस करने की बहुत आवश्यकता है और इम्प्लीमेंट करने की आवश्यकता है। जब तक अवेयरनेस नहीं होगी जब तक अच्छी एडवोकेसी नहीं होगी तब तक इम्प्लीमेंट करना दिक्कत है। जैसे कि 3 बड़े बड़े जो केस सुप्रीम कोर्ट में हुए, MC मेहता वर्सेस यूनियन ऑफ इंडिया, और तीनों केसों में सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने बोला है कि जब तक अवेयरनेस एंड एजुकेशन नहीं बढ़ेगा तब तक ये एनवायरमेंटल प्रोटेक्शन एक्ट का फॉलो करना, इम्प्लीमेंट करना मुश्किल सा काम है। और इसीलिए सुप्रीम कोर्ट की ऑर्डर की वजह से ये जो स्कूल कैरिकुलम है या कॉलेज कैरिकुलम है, इसमें एनवायरमेंट का सब्जेक्ट मैंडेटरी किया गया। अभी रिसेंटली एक सुओ मोटो गुजरात हाईकोर्ट में भी हुई साबरमती रिवर पॉल्यूशन के बारे में। इसमें भी वही डिवीजन बेंच ने ऐसा ही बोला कि हम तो ऑर्डर दे देंगे, लेकिन फिर क्या, तो जब तक लोगों में से जुम्बेश नहीं होगी, उसको मूवमेंट नहीं होगी, तब तक ये मुश्किल ही होगी। और ये प्लास्टिक पॉल्यूशन में भी ऐसा ही है। लेकिन कई बार सवाल भी उठता है कि यहाँ जाकिर बहन, रुखसाना बहन मेरे साथ जुड़े हैं। हमने एक प्रोग्राम रखा था, लोकमंच यहाँ का लोकल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन अहमदाबाद का, और नारोल टेक्सटाइल एसोसिएशन के साथ और गुजरात पॉल्यूशन कंट्रोल बोर्ड और कॉरपोरेशन के साथ। तो हम गए थे क्लोथ बैग डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करने के लिए। एक बड़ा मार्केट है, सब्जी मार्केट है, करीबन 250 इसमें वो रैंकड़ी खड़ी रहती है और बड़ी मात्रा में लोग खरीदने के लिए आते हैं, सब्जी और दूसरी कटलरी भी। तब कई लोगों ने मुझे आके बोला कि साहब आप तो अच्छा काम कर रहे हो, लेकिन ये जो सिंगल यूज प्लास्टिक है उसका प्रोडक्शन ही ना हो तो फिर वो बिकेगा ही नहीं, मिलेगा ही नहीं, तो फिर तो काम बन जाएगा। बाकी आप तो क्लोथ बैग देते रहोगे और जब तक वो प्रोडक्शन बंद नहीं होगा तब तक तो चलता रहेगा। बात सोचने जैसी है, विचारने जैसी है कि हमारी भारत सरकार भी इतना काम कर रही है, इतना अवेयरनेस का भी काम कर रहे हैं, रूल्स भी ला रहे हैं, तो फिर क्यों नहीं हो रहा है। और मुझे भी दुख होता है कि एज अ बीइंग ए स्टेट लेवल कमिटी ऑन वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट, आई एम एक्सपर्ट मेंबर देयर, इवन तो नहीं हो रहा है तो बहुत बुरा लगता है कि हम तो अब इसमें शामिल है और नहीं कर सकते हैं। तो ये चिंता की बात है कि किस प्रकार की एडवोकेसी करे, ये सब करे। तो ये जो पेरिस एग्रीमेंट जो क्लाइमेट चेंज में हुआ तो बहुत पेरिस प्रख्यात हुआ। अभी जो पेरिस प्रख्यात हुआ 2 रीजन से, अभी तो जो दंगे चल रहे हैं वो अलग बात है, लेकिन बराबर मंथ की शुरुआत में उसका एंडिंग हुआ। जो प्लास्टिक ट्रीटी हुई थी वो INC2 के नाम से जानी जाती है अभी। तो सेकंड फेज था, अभी 4th फेज के बाद फाइनल लास्ट में 2024 तक वो लीगली बाइंडिंग प्लास्टिक ट्रीटी हो जाएगी। तो इसके बारे में थोड़ी बात करूंगा। और फिर प्लास्टिक पॉल्यूशन और ये सब है, इसके बारे में मेरी कलीग अर्पिता ने बहुत अच्छा प्रेजेंटेशन बनाया है। तो मैं मेरी बात जल्दी से खत्म करूं ताकि वो अर्पिता भगत अपनी बात अच्छी तरह से रख पाए और इसमें डिस्कशन हो जाए। तो ऐसा हुआ कि जो पेरिस एग्रीमेंट जो क्लाइमेट चेंज में हुआ, इसमें ज्यादातर वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट की बात नहीं है। और जो हमारे जो डॉक्यूमेंट हम रखते हैं भारत सरकार, सब इसमें भी वो एमिशन रिडक्शन की बात है, मिटिगेशन की बात है, एडेप्टेशन की बात है, लेकिन इसमें वो प्लास्टिक की बात इतनी नहीं आती है। इसीलिए जो यूनाइटेड नेशन एनवायरमेंटल असेंबली है उसकी जो मीटिंग हुई थी 2022 में, इसमें तय किया गया है कि ये प्लास्टिक को अलग से लेना पड़ेगा कि इट इज अ बर्निंग इश्यू नाउ इन द वर्ल्ड एंड वी आर फेसिंग ए लॉट ऑफ प्रॉब्लम ऑन दैट। इवन कैंसर तक की बीमारी भी हो जाती है और काफी हेल्थ हैजार्ड इसमें है। तो जो ह्यूमन हेल्थ और एनवायरमेंट पे काफी उसका इम्पैक्ट होता है और इसीलिए वो अलग से वो आईएनसी का गठन हुआ, इंटर गवर्नमेंटल नेगोशिएटिंग कमिटी का गठन हुआ। पहली मीटिंग हुई थी रोगिया में और दूसरी मीटिंग जो आईएनसी 2 से हुई वो अभी हुई पेरिस में और तीसरी होने वाली है नैरोबी में, देन कनाडा में और फाइनली 2024 में लीगली बाइंडिंग होगा। होप करते हैं कि लीगली बाइंडिंग में सभी देश शामिल हो, 170 कंट्रीज। इसमें भी काफी पॉलिटिक्स होता है और कई लोग जो वहाँ जो हम थे तो पता चला कि कई देश दे आर नॉट एग्रीड टू डू दिस लीगली बाइंडिंग ट्रीटी। लाइक सऊदी अरेबिया ने बोला कि हम प्लास्टिक पॉल्यूशन कम नहीं करेंगे। इंडिया का स्टैंड थोड़ा नॉट हियर एंड देयर बीच वाला था, स्मार्ट है इंडिया थोड़ा, लेकिन पूरी प्रक्रिया से लगा कि इंडिया इज ऑल्सो नॉट विलिंग टू डू द लीगली बाइंडिंग प्लास्टिक ट्रीटी। जो भी बोलते हैं जो भी करते हैं, लेकिन जो मुद्दे सवाल उठाए पेरिस की जो मीटिंग में उससे थोड़ा स्पष्ट हुआ कि हम भी बात तो करते हैं लेकिन वी आर नॉट रेडी टू रिड्यूसिंग द प्लास्टिक प्रोडक्शन। तो जो ये जो आईएनसी 2 में जो ओपिनियन लिया गया था आईएनसी बनने से पहले, तो इसमें 74% लोगों ने बोला है कि प्लास्टिक ट्रीटी बहुत जरूरी है क्योंकि ये ह्यूमन हेल्थ को प्रोटेक्शन करने के लिए बहुत आवश्यकता है। 64% लोगों ने ये बोला था कि ये जो प्लास्टिक के अंदर जो केमिकल्स यूज होता है, टॉक्सिक यूज होता है, इसके बारे में शायद वो हमारी अर्पिता बात करेंगी और उसको कंट्रोल करने की बहुत आवश्यकता है। तो जो प्लास्टिक मटेरियल है इसमें जो यूज होता है टॉक्सिक्स या हैजार्डस केमिकल्स और मोर देन 1300 टाइप्स ऑफ हैजार्डस केमिकल्स ये प्लास्टिक में यूज होते हैं एंड विच इज रियली वेरी हैजार्डस टू अवर ह्यूमन हेल्थ एंड मराइन हेल्थ। तो ये प्रॉब्लम है। तो जो दो बातें प्लास्टिक ट्रीटी में का ऑब्जेक्टिव बेसिकली था वो हेल्थ प्रोटेक्शन, ह्यूमन हेल्थ प्रोटेक्शन और एनवायरमेंटल प्रोटेक्शन की बात थी और दूसरा मकसद था कि रिड्यूस द प्रोडक्शन ऑफ प्लास्टिक। तो इसमें जो प्रायोरिटाइज जो हुआ तो रिड्यूसिंग द जनरेशन ऑफ द प्लास्टिक वेस्ट एंड साउंड डिस्पोजल ऑफ एग्जिस्टिंग प्लास्टिक मटेरियल। अभी डिस्पोजल तो हम कर रहे हैं लेकिन फिर भी वो सही ढंग से नहीं हो रहा है और कई बार जो रिसाइकलिंग करते हैं इसकी वजह से भी हैजार्डियस गैसेस जनरेट होता है। तो इसकी भी चर्चा की इसमें आवश्यकता थी और वो की जाती है। वो जो पेपर तैयार किया गया है इसमें कि भी किस प्रकार का प्रोहिबिशन रखे ताकि वो टॉक्सिक केमिकल है वो रिसाइकलिंग की टाइम पे उसका एमिशन ना हो और दिक्कतें ना खड़ी हो और हमारा जो एटमॉस्फेयर है इसमें वो एमिशन ना हो। तीसरी बात इसमें ये भी थी कि बैन करो और रिस्ट्रिक्शन रखो वो प्लास्टिक ट्रेड में। जो ब्रेजिल कन्वेंशन हुआ इसमें वो था कि हम वेस्ट को नहीं ला सकते सब। तो जो केमिकल जो टॉक्सिक केमिकल है प्लास्टिक मटेरियल्स में उसमें भी ऐसा कुछ बैन होना चाहिए कि उसकी ट्रेड ना हो। अदरवाइज तो रेडीमेड प्लास्टिक वो लोग भेजेंगे लेकिन फिर जब हम रिसाइकल करेंगे और रीयूज करेंगे तो फिर ये दिक्कतें होगी। चौथी बात इसमें ये थी कि उसका फंडिंग कौन करे क्योंकि ये सब करने के लिए तो फंडिंग की आवश्यकता है। तो बेसिकली जो हमारा इंटरनेशनली जो प्रिंसिपल्स हमने एक्सेप्ट किया है बेसिक की प्रिंसिपल्स इसमें है कि पॉल्यूटर्स पे प्रिंसिपल्स और उसके तहत जो केमिकल्स प्रोड्यूस करते हैं और पेट्रोकेमिकल्स प्रोड्यूस करते हैं, वो लोगों की प्राइमरी फंडामेंटल जिम्मेदारी होती है कि दे हैव टू फंड टू ऑल डू दिस एक्टिविटीज। तो ये बात है कि जैसे कि जो भी प्रोड्यूस कर रहा है बड़े पैमाने पे, उसकी जिम्मेदारी होती है। उसको हम भारत के कानून के मुताबिक जो प्लास्टिक रूल्स हुए हैं, इसमें बोलते हैं कि ईपीआर, एक्सटेंडेड प्रोड्यूसर रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी, इसमें जो प्लास्टिक बनाता है, प्लास्टिक यूज करता है, तो इस प्रकार यहाँ भी प्लास्टिक ट्रीटी में भी यही हुआ कि भाई कौन फंडिंग करेगा। तो फिर फंडिंग की बात आई तो ये हुई कि जो केमिकल्स और पेट्रोकेमिकल्स जो प्रोड्यूस करते हैं, दे आर द मेन एक्टर टू कंट्रोल द प्लास्टिक पॉल्यूशन और उसके लिए फंडिंग करे। तो इसमें भी ये जो प्लास्टिक ट्रीटी हुई, इसमें तीन बेसिक की प्रिंसिपल्स है। इसमें एक प्रिकॉशनरी प्रिंसिपल्स जिसकी हम बात कर रहे हैं कि भाई प्रिकॉशनरी प्रिंसिपल्स मीन व्हाट। तो हम प्लास्टिक इस प्रकार का बनाए कि जिसमें जो मैंने बोला कि 1300 जो केमिकल्स यूज होते हैं जो हजार्डियस है, उसका यूज कम हो और कम से कम इस प्रकार का केमिकल का यूज करो जो हार्मफुल ना हो। तो उसको बोलते हैं प्रिकॉशनरी प्रिंसिपल्स। दूसरा मैंने बताया जो पॉल्यूटर्स प्रिंसिपल्स। तो ये प्रिंसिपल्स है कि those who are producing, they are responsible to control it and they are ultimately responsible about the plastic pollution. तो ये जो प्रिंसिपल ग्लोबली और यूनिवर्सली एक्सेप्टेड किया गया है। और थर्ड वन जो है वो ह्यूमन राइट का सवाल है, जो अर्पिता इसमें बात करेगी, जो लाइफ साइकिल की बात करने वाली है, इसमें क्या क्या दिक्कतें होती है। जैसे कि मराइन लाइफ है, हमारे मछुआरों को बहुत दिक्कतें होती है और हमको भी। ये ह्यूमन राइट का सवाल है। जब मछली वो जब प्लास्टिक खा जाती है और अब मछली को हम जब खाते हैं फिश को, तब हमारे को भी प्रॉब्लम होती है। इसलिए अभी एक बहुत अच्छा कार्टून आया था कि एक फिश बेचने वाला की ट्रक खड़ी थी और एक कंज्यूमर जो बोल रहा था कि मुझे प्लास्टिक बैग दो, कैरी बैग दो। तो सेलर ने बोला कि द प्लास्टिक बैग इज इनसाइड द फिश विच यू आर कैरिंग। तो बहुत अच्छा कार्टून था, मैसेज था क्लियर कि अब ये प्लास्टिक सब मछली के अंदर है। हमारे इंडिया के परिप्रेक्ष्य में बात करें तो हम हिंदू राष्ट्र की बात करते हैं और अहिंसा परमो धर्म की बात करते हैं हम, लेकिन और जो हमारी गाय है उसको हम पवित्र मानते हैं, होली काओ जिसको बोलते हैं, और बहुत दंगे भी होते हैं, वो पिटाई भी होती है लोगों की इसके बारे में अननेसेसरीली। इट्स एंटी ह्यूमन राइट एक्टिविटी, बट इवन दो इट इज हैपनिंग बिकॉज जब काउ की बात होती है तब ए मॉब लिंचिंग ये सब इश्यू होता है। अब सवाल हमारा ये है कि जब किसी आदमी को आप मारते हो गाय के नाम से, तो एक गाय को हम प्लास्टिक देते हैं और गाय प्लास्टिक खाती है, तो वो आर द रिस्पॉन्सिबल। ये जो हमारी गाय को गाय माता मानते हैं उसको मारने के लिए वो आर द रिस्पॉन्सिबल एट द गवर्नमेंट because they are don't need the proper implementation or generators those who are throwing here and there, और जो प्रोड्यूसर है वो जिम्मेदार है। कौन जिम्मेदार है अल्टीमेटली? जो हम माता ही मानते हैं, मॉब लिंचिंग होता है, दंगे होते हैं, कई लोगों की मौत हो जाती है गाय के नाम पे और प्लास्टिक के वो इसके नाम पे, तो फिर प्लास्टिक खाने से गाय मर जाती है, वो आर द रिस्पॉन्सिबल। एक बड़ा सवाल इसमें है। बट बेसिकली ये सवाल है तो ये ह्यूमन राइट का सवाल भी है कि अल्टीमेटली ह्यूमन राइट का वायलेशन हो रहा है इसमें। क्या हुआ वो प्लास्टिक ट्रीटी में? तो उसमें बानिंग की बात की है, प्लास्टिक प्रोडक्शन को फेज आउट आप कम करो, और जो हम पॉलीमर्स और मोनोपॉलीमर्स यूज करते हैं प्लास्टिक में उसका भी कम यूज हो। तो सस्टेनेबल प्रोडक्शन और सस्टेनेबल कंजप्शन ऑफ द प्लास्टिक, इसकी बात भी है इसमें। और हम प्रमोटिंग द यूज ऑफ द सेफ सस्टेनेबल ऑल्टरनेटिव्स एंड सब्स्टिट्यूट्स अबाउट द प्लास्टिक, ये सब ट्रीटे में ये पेपर में शामिल है। और बायोडिग्रेडेबल प्लास्टिक की बात करें और कंपोस्टेबल प्लास्टिक की बात करें, ये सब चीजें इसमें शामिल है। तो फाइनली ये जो बात है कि एलिमिनेटिंग द हार्मफुल प्लास्टिक केमिकल्स एंड ऑल इन द प्लास्टिक मैन्युफैक्चरिंग, ये सब बड़ी मोटी मोटी बात मैंने बताई है प्लास्टिसिटी में। अब देखते हैं कि क्या होगा। अब INC3 जब नैरोबी में नवंबर में मिलती है तो क्या होगा, और हमारा मकसद वही है कि ये सब चीजें हम भी हमारी भारत सरकार को लिखे, प्लास्टिक प्रोडक्शन के बारे में भी और प्लास्टिक पॉल्यूशन के बारे में भी। तो इतना मैं बोल के यहाँ ठहरता हूँ, क्योंकि हम सब ज्यादा तो जानते हैं इसके बारे में, लेकिन मेरी कलीग जो अर्पिता ये पूरी प्लास्टिक की लाइफ साइकिल की बात करने वाली है और उसका हार्म क्या होता है इसके बारे में करने वाली है। यदि कोई क्वेश्चन आएंगे तो बाद में हम बात करेंगे। थैंक यू वेरी मच टू ऑल एंड थैंक यू प्रिया।
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your very candid views on plastic waste management issues. Now over to you, Arpita ma'am. Just let me share your presentation.
Thank you, Mahesh ji. I think the way you just spoke is just like telling a story, and it's always good to hear a story which is relatable, and we all feel part of it. I think सबसे पहले तो I just want to say this is a great way to start July, which is a plastic-free July. Every year, civil society who work against plastic pollution celebrate Plastic-Free July and basically push the reason and the idea and the practice and the ways that plastics can be eliminated from our lives. And I think there is no better way than to start this by talking about the toxins in plastics. And I think we have a very interesting mix of people here. So I will do a little bit of a recap and then try to cover some aspects of these toxics. And I just want to say it's very, I'm not an expert in toxics. So whatever research and reading I did, it was eye-opening for me as well. Just thinking about how much chemicals surround us and how much of that toxics is becomes part of the food that we consume, the food we feed to our children, our animals, and that goes into marine life, as you've briefly spoken. So without much more delay, let's just start. And I want to just recap a few things. I think we all know that plastic is coming from fossil fuel. It is the same fossil fuel that caused the climate crisis that we are currently trying to deal with. And so I just want to emphasize that it is plastic, and plastic pollution is not just a factor of pollution. It is also, we need to acknowledge the injustice to human, animal, and ecosystem health. And plastics, more importantly, is a complex material. It is made up of different variety of mixtures of monomers and polymers, and also chemicals, both which are intentionally and unintentionally released. Their impact, therefore, is not just limited to where they are produced, consumed, or disposed because of their complex nature, as well as the transboundary nature of plastics itself. And just if I could request Priya to go into first slide. We are already sitting in a very high consumption levels of plastics, as we know. We know that we have legislations in our countries which are trying to deal with plastics as a waste management issue to ensure that, and there are different conversations where plastics control is seen as a more of a environmentally sound disposal issue, which I know that in civil society and really in the movement that we are in across, whether it's IPEN, Gaia, or Break Free from Plastic, and many others, we have been trying to emphasize that plastic is a problem of production. And you can see from this figure here that global plastic production is rising, and it is set to reach a figure of 34,000 million tons very, very soon. And if you could just think about it in terms of just how do we relate, there could be more plastic in the ocean than fish by 2050, which is not so far away. And if no action is taken, this annual flow is going to continue to increase. So the thing that we are trying to emphasize is that the current recycling system that exists, or any infrastructure that you create or we want to create, or the industry thinks that it can create and sell to us, will not be able to cope with these volumes. History has proven this. Only about 9% or 10%, and in India, it is just about 12% of plastics that is recycled. And of course, it is questioned often, what is recycling, what is safe recycling, what is environmentally sound recycling, and that conversations could continue. But as Gaia, we emphasize the approach to look at recycling as a livelihoods issue as well as a pollution issue. So while it exists, we know that just having these technocratic solutions or having recycling is not enough. The idea, and it is very, very simple, and it is what we are pushing in different forums, especially in the new treaty, the plastics treaty, is to cut production, have bans, have phase out plans, look at the different industry, talk about and understand what the problematic plastics are, what are the most essential plastics, for example, in the healthcare industry, where we necessarily definitely need it, and also start to explore solutions in the form of reuse and refill systems, as well as alternatives which already exist, which have existed 20 years back, which have existed in the lifetimes of most people listening this afternoon. So with that, let's go into the next slide, please. And just to give you this insight on India, I know that I mentioned that 12% of plastic waste is recycled. About 20% goes into end-of-life solutions as co-incineration, plastic to fuel, road making, and most of these solutions we do not accept. They are not environmentally friendly. They cause more harm and more damage than help. And about 68% of plastic waste is unaccounted. That means we do not have the data, we do not have clarity on what actually happens. This is as per Center for Science and Environment report, which is just very recent from last year. So while I spoke about plastic life cycle, I know that, chemical pollution from plastic is a global problem. And you see that as the production of plastic is rising, and from this figure from IPEN, the global chemical productions is also rising. And this shouldn't be a surprise, because from different reports, we know over 10,000 chemicals are added to plastics or leached from plastics or released from plastics in different formats. So we know that plastic is also a chemical pollution problem, but we also need to acknowledge it is most acute in areas near production facilities, especially in low and middle income countries that have weaker regulations and are often used as dumping grounds for plastic waste through things like plastic waste exports, which is should rightly be called waste colonialism. The people in these countries, in poor countries, and India is one of them, are already disproportionately exposed to toxic chemicals and plastic pollution and face greater health risk due to this environmental injustice, which is why we have been calling Western countries to stop plastic waste exports. And we know that these countries majorly are the US, Canada, the UK, as well as many European countries who, while they have the infrastructure, while they consume the most amount of plastic, still do not know how to recycle their way out of this problem. And many countries in Asia, and particularly India, Malaysia, the Philippines, Indonesia, and many more I'm probably forgetting, become the recipients of this waste. And if you remember, in 2018, I believe China banned imports of these plastic waste. And that really led to cascading set of events that basically had more of the other Asian countries taking the burden. And of course, some countries in the West tried to buckle up and create more recycling infrastructure, but clearly they're struggling. Australia, in recent times, being a good example. Australia, for example, introduced or made commitments through different regulations to stop plastic waste exports and have better recycling facilities, but they went back very recently to this commitment after the incoming government's new environment minister made these statements, and that was very disappointing to hear. And of course, now limelight is on them to sort of buckle up and do better, and they must do better. And also, I want to emphasize that every step of the process, if you can go to the next slide, it reinforces the climate crisis as well, not just in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions you all know about, again, plastic being a fossil fuel product, but also in terms of the human rights crisis, that the livelihood, land rights, right to clean and healthy air, access to water, essential social justice measures are also encroached upon by those employed in refineries and production, as well as those who are living in vicinities, and we call them the fence line and of course frontline communities. And one simple example of we should also think about is the production of plastic as well as processing of plastic through whether it's incineration or recycling or dumping in the form of landfills. And you can think about what are the landfills, where are the landfills in your cities, in your states to understand this. They are located in low-income neighborhoods, which are already disenfranchised, which are where communities are already facing additional burden of pollution, where they do not often have the services required, such as waste pickup. And these underserved population, therefore, and there are researchers, especially in the United States, I don't know about India, because in India, of course, we do not have very good research available in the issue of plastics and waste. These populations show a higher cases of respiratory and cancers through emissions, through fires, through, of course, chemicals that is found. And at the stage of disposal, this plastic pollution continues to seep into the environment as well. Waste pickers and workers particularly suffer the consequences, especially if you think about informal recyclers as well, because they are in closest contact with waste plastic when it has become waste, when it has become contaminated by food particles and different things which kind of use plastics. And if I can just tell you, 40% of plastics that is produced, actually the figure could be much more, is in the form of packaging, right? So we really need to think about the packaging that we actually need, and how much do we want to use this. And if you look at the Asian countries, if you look at the countries like Philippines, for example, a lot of plastic packaging is in a very small, like sachet forms. And this is something that is created by the industry, is perpetuated by the industry as well. And we need to think about whether we really need to have these small sachets all the time. So broadly, the rich global north countries consume the most plastics per capita, but the burden of disposal, the processing form, falls on global south nations who already have limited resources and capacity. And this is, again, an example of not in my backyard effect. But then, of course, this is the visible effects of plastic that we see in the form of, if you remember the turtle, the image of turtle with a piece of straw stuck in its nose. And that was really visible, how you see seabirds and whales and fishes sort of mistaking plastic waste for their prey, for their food, and for many different things. You see closer home birds in cities using a plastic material to create their nesting sites. But of course, there are the invisible impacts from microplastics or pellets to the toxic additives and chemicals, and something we talk about particularly today. And you know that in human blood, 1.6 microgram of plastic particles per milliliter of blood sample has been found. Plastics have been found in human placenta. Plastics have been found in salt, including in India itself. So that's something that should be visible, should be known, but isn't a mainstream reality. So something the industry has managed to keep hidden from us for almost 50 years is, of course, the invention of plastics, but the thousands of chemicals that are added into it. I have said this before, we have intentionally added substances, monomers, aids, additives. We also have non-intentionally added substances. And one thing to think about, and I know that the treaty is going to go into a process where it starts to define certain terminologies, including what are really plastics, and different organizations have different viewpoint, but we really need a universal definition. And the fact of the matter is plastics do not exist without chemicals, and harmful chemicals are released at every phase. And you can see it from this figure, from oil extraction to production to transport, use, and disposals. Chemicals are added to give plastic the qualities that industry discovered that we enjoy, like inflammability, such as flame retardants and the chemicals, flexibility, right? Like if you see the plastic bags, for example, the disposable things, it's often the flexibility that is required. Plasticizers, one of the worst chemicals. Grease resistance, this is particularly used for food packaging. Again, for disposable food packaging, such as the PFAS, and we'll learn a little bit more. Sterility through biocides and many other properties. And the market for these additives is also growing from about 43.8 billion in 2018, and this is $billion, to 61 odd $billion by 2025, which is almost here. So these chemicals, over 10,000 have been identified already, and some reports by UNEP itself says 13,000, the figure. Data on more than 2,400 additionally has been classified as substances of concern, which means there is incomplete or no hazard data on hundreds of other plastic chemicals. These have been linked to cancers, as Maheshji pointed out earlier, damage to immune as well as reproductive system, endocrine systems, impaired intellectual functions, developmental delays, and other conditions. Evidence also already suggests that we are seeing serious health problems from exposures throughout plastic life cycle. And the chemicals that are released from plastic can disrupt different kind of functions, different kinds of issues. And some of these issues are very difficult to identify. Some of the investigative work happening right now in Philippines, for example, is trying to create evidence against big polluters, the likes of Unilever's and Nestle's and Coke's in the world, to basically qualify that their products are causing these health harms. And one of the very well known ways to do it is through bioaccumulation. That means how much of a chemical is actually accumulated in human bodies. And it is seen through sampling of blood and urine. And really, I can tell you that all of us right now will have evidence of these chemicals. Plasticizers, for example, are used to make plastic flexible. They are seen as many as 80% of products. Polyurethanes, which are in furniture, bedding, polyvinyl chloride, we all know PVC, pipes, packaging, wires, epoxy resins, coatings, adhesives, things like fiberglass. Polystyrene is very, very common. And I often say, in my opinion, it's the worst plastic really, and it is used in food packaging, hard plastics also, because it floats when it breaks down on the surface of water. It takes a much longer to be processed in the environment. Some of these chemicals, some of these plastics takes many thousands of years. And investigations and even just like plugging activities have found plastics which were made in like 1970s existing today. So we really need to take this seriously. BPA, which is one of the most common, bisphenol A, one of the most common plasticizer, is hormone disruptive. It causes reproductive toxicity. Benzene and phenol are mutagenic. That means it can actually cause changes to your genetic material. Phthalates is another chemical family, which is again another plasticizer with really strong effects. One of the other chemicals which is very important, and you'll hear about it often, is the persistent organic pollutants, the POPs. And if you see this figure, you can see different stages and different if you see here, POPs leach through consumer use, and some of these products are really commonplace. That means we are surrounded by these products. They are really hazardous and they cause big threat. They cause cancers, tumors, neurological disorders, reproductive disorders. And I can tell you the reading about these chemicals was not fun at all. It was depressing, it was worrying, and really we need to pay attention. PFAS are another, another family of chemicals. They are very pervasive, and they basically are used in food packaging, food disposable packaging, paper wraps, and fiber. So, we have these disposable cups for tea, for example, these days. And often you will not realize, but there will be very thin layer of plastics found in these cups as well. So something that we need to be very, very careful about. And just going into the next slide, I know we don't have so much time to, yeah. This is from a very excellent report, and I can hopefully share it with you. I'll request Priya to send it across from CL, and Gaia was one of the partners of this report. It is mentioned below, Plastics and Health. And this report is really, really extensive, I think more than 70 pages long, and it looked at different stages of plastic life cycle, different stages of consumption in how different chemicals, among other things, cause the impact to human health, different kinds of chemicals. It quotes different studies that done across different parts of the world on identifying some of these chemicals and seeing really the impacts. But now, if I could spend the next few minutes to talk a little bit about the policy ecosystems and really emphasize why we also need a plastics treaty from a chemicals point of view. Next slide, please. So there are multiple, when we looked at plastic, right, because it's a complex material, there are so many different conventional multilateral agreements in place that are relevant. But within that, right, if we break down plastics as polymers and monomers and as chemicals, and I know to a layman, everything is chemical, which is not really untrue, but some of these things are really technical and really specific. But if you look at chemicals, they're very limited regulation. There are these three which are important along with minimata, which is of course for mercury. But if we look at just the number of chemicals, I've just found this report, which is a very latest report actually from a few months back, in fact, which looks at governance of plastics, and it looks at this whole ecosystem of different international agreements that exist. Chemicals used in plastics without actual evidence and hazard data is about 6,000, so that's 46%. But within that, if we look at chemicals used in plastics which have some regulation, there are chemicals which are potential concern, which we know but remain unregulated, that's 24%. The chemicals of limited concern is not there, that means they're not as bad, that's about 3,800. So that's 29%. But if you look at this whole, let's say there are 100 total, 100% of this total, only about 1% of chemicals in plastics actually have existing regulation. And I have just pointed 3 of those, but you can think about Minamata and Montreal in addition. But among the three of these which are relevant to this, indirectly relevant, but also directly relevant, there's only Stockholm Convention, which looks at 100 chemicals in plastic that are added, right? And it specifically looks at POPs, which we talked about earlier, which are additives for as plasticizers, flame retardants, and surfactants. We know that Stockholm Convention, for example, it restricts the trade of POPs as well. But the problem with Stockholm Convention, I'm not getting into technical details here, and I know that even I do not have that level of understanding, because a lot of these conventions are from the early 2000s, right? That means this information and this knowledge has been sitting with us for over 20 years in the minimum. PFO, within the paradigm of POPs, or within the paradigm of the number of chemicals, it looks only at few chemicals that are created in this list, right? It does not look at the entire family of the chemicals. And often the problem with industry is when you regulate one chemical, the industry puts a new chemical forward in this, which is closely related, which could be part of the same family, right? But therefore has the same toxic consequences. And therefore, one of the things that the movement asks for is not just banning, just one chemical that you can find and you've identified and you've named, like PFOA and PFOS, but banning the entire cluster, entire class, not individual chemicals. So PFAS that I just talked about, which is chemically, just one second, which provides grease resistance. That means it is one of the most common chemicals you see, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, right? Within that, it's only PFOA and PFOS which are under the Stockholm Convention, right? There's a third PFAS, which is perfluorohexane, which is not covered. And I'm just trying to, without getting too technical, and I know I just did, I'm trying to point to the fact that we need to ban the entire class of chemicals and not just one particular. We need to strengthen the regulation also to Stockholm itself to look at POP's waste derived from plastic waste management. And I know that in terms of the chemicals in waste, chemicals in plastics, Stockholm has not really done us good, because till today, it doesn't look at how chemicals come out from in the recycling industry, for example. For the recyclers, we do not have enough information. They still are in the dark, because a lot of the labeling standards, a lot of the transparency, and this is one important factor, because in the plastics treaty, we are calling out for chemicals transparency. That means we need disclosure of the chemicals, not just the polymers. And I know even with resin codes, we have 7 resin codes for plastics. Even with resin codes, we do not have the exact understanding of the monomers and polymers that go into the product, because a lot of the plastics that are currently being manufactured have multiple polymers and have different kinds of chemicals included. So we need to give consumers that information. We need to disclose it. We need to be transparent about these chemicals and these polymers, and therefore we are, as a movement, calling for chemicals transparency. But we definitely need to have these standards for the recycling industry, the recyclers, the common recyclers. Still in India, informal recycling is a major form of recycling that happens. These recyclers basically touch and feel the plastics and decide which category, and the segregation actually happens according to that. That means you could have, through recycling, this different sort of concoction of chemicals coming together, because the scientific knowledge used in this process is almost negligible currently. And therefore we need to provide that awareness. We need to have that transparency, that these different existing governance mechanisms are not helping us provide. And that's one of the things, therefore, we are trying to have in the plastics treaty. Therefore, the plastics treaty is an important mechanisms that we need currently to have the controls that we want. And also, if we look at the Basel Convention, which is one of the oldest ones that currently exist to protect human health and environment from adverse effects of hazardous human waste. That means Basel itself is much broader. It looks at waste overall, and it looks at identifying waste as hazardous. And plastics was included not very long ago. And within that, now the push is to have these transparency, of course, but categorizing plastic waste as containing chemicals, because Basel currently does not do that. We also want ending of exemptions to the prior informed consent procedure. Prior informed consent basically means that the country which is importing, the country which is exporting needs to get consent from the country that they are importing waste to, sending waste to ensure that the country which is receiving this waste understands the plethora of chemicals, polymers, and different hazardous things that they are accepting. And that is currently not happening. And we know, even within Basel, what is currently happening is a lot of illegal plastic waste export and import. And a lot of the things are not transparently provided. And when we look at plastics 3D could help really, Basil. And currently, the unfortunate part is even during the INC2, the mention of the plastic waste trade was very little, very minimal. It is not part of the core obligations yet. And I think that's something we should be pushing for in the Asia Pacific, and really ensuring that when we are pushing for it, we are asking for chemicals and polymers separately and included both as chemicals itself, but also as in the annex, which is important, because if you don't have it in the annex and if you define chemicals already, you'll again be in the same position as these different conventions I mentioned here, where you have one particular chemical identified, but you're not naming all of the family, right? So it's important to have these chemicals in the annex in the treaty so that these chemical lists can be upgraded, and as newly chemicals are discovered, and the industry tries to push more and more chemicals down our throats. So lastly, Rotterdam looks at information exchange on the exports and imports of chemicals. But again, Rotterdam itself is very, very limited right now. It does not include control measures to restrict production. It is not helping control production at all. And it is only providing mechanism for information access and exchange, and consent really depends on the import itself. So with that, let's go into the next slide very, very briefly. And I know Priya is getting restless. I can see it in her face. But therefore, this is one of the asks we have from an effective plastics treaty. It must eliminate toxics. Like I said, not just BPA, but all biphenyls, not just PFAS, but the entire family, PVCs, PUs, and of course, right now, through the intersessional work, countries need to look at which, and this is our job as civil society to help, and also that as for folks in the scientist coalition, they're looking at providing the evidence, providing the research, providing information on why these chemicals matter, which chemicals need to be included from the ban, which polymers need to be included, and really ensuring that we're pushing for the families of chemicals. And I think that is it from me today. And yeah, thank you for listening to me. Thank you for paying attention. And this floor is now open for questions. Here's my contact. You can also reach out to me. And I would do you all good by sharing the reports that I've referred to in putting this presentation together. Thank you so much. Thank you, Paryavaran Mitra, Maheshji, Priya, and everyone who I don't know is behind the scenes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your presentation. It was really informative in terms of chemicals and in terms of policy issues as well. So I have a question in mind. What are the policy measures and ground action that is being taken to monitor the recycling, plastic recycling industries and its impact on environment?
Sorry, when you say ground, do you mean in terms of research on recycling?
Monitoring issues, if they are being undergoing the policy changes or not, according to the policy, the action is being taken or not.
Yeah, I mean, if it is with regards to India, I think the information is really, really limited. In India, there is, in my knowledge, no such policy measures on looking specifically at chemicals of concern or even at toxic chemicals overall, but I could be wrong. In terms of recycling, like I said, there is very little data, there is very little information. We know right now, and perhaps the folks in CSEs and the likes would know better, but we know that 12% plastic is recycled, but what is the recycling used? Whether it's actually mechanical recycling that is done with the social and health safeguards in place, that's a question mark. And I think that's a question mark for most of us. But I do know that there is research going on to look at what kinds of plastics are recycled more than others, what kind of plastics are have the reverse logistics chain, have economic value in India, and that continues to be upgraded, and that would also vary from city to city and based on the infrastructure. But in terms of looking at recyclate and looking at the chemicals in recyclate, I think the information, the different reports that I quoted here have found toxic chemicals in recyclate, toxic chemicals in plastics, which should be monitored. Even the toxic chemicals in the plastic imports that countries are doing, that information is available to different countries. How much of it is Indian context related is something that I think the Indian civil society can answer better.
Thank you.
Hello, I
Yes.
agree with the Arpita. Under the plastic rules, there is a provision of monitoring. But of course, it is difficult to get the information under the RTI even. So very little data is available because whoever the recycler, they are authorized by the Gujarat Pollution Control Board or the State Pollution Control Board. And the State Pollution Board has to monitor, but unfortunately, till it is difficult to get the data and all. And the second question is about the impact. In India, mostly the government is not doing any kind of impact study. Either it is a water pollution or air pollution or the plastic pollution. So it's a question, and then that is why the Arpita rightly saying that we as a civil society, we put a pressure to the government to publish a monitoring data and also the impact of the plastic pollution or whatever the pollution is until it is leaking. Like recently the Larsen report came that in India in 2019, 27 lakh people died because of the pollution, and only due to the air pollution, 17 lakh people died. This is question asked under in the parliament. The government said that we cannot say that that much death because of the air pollution. There is a number of reasons. But again, there is a sub question, and the government is telling that we have no study about the impact of the pollution and the death. So government is not willing to do such kind of study. And that is why we as a civil society put a pressure to the government that they must have to carry out a kind of this kind of data. I remember that in 2016, the CAG report, the Comptroller and Auditor General of India's report in the Gujarat about the surface water contamination. The CAG recommended to the government of Gujarat that they have to government, it is a duty of the government to declare that the 40% of the surface water is getting contaminated. Even in the 3 area of the Gujarat is a water is not, I mean, potable. So CAG recommended that government has to declare that this water is not safe. But unfortunately, our government is not, I mean, willing to put all this data. So, and the purpose of this webinar is also like that are we aware about all these things? And that is why we, the people, at least those who are here, more than, I count it, more than 35, अभी तो 25 है, लेकिन गए आए मिला के 35 से ज्यादा लोग थे. वो लोगों ने भी एक मूवमेंट शुरू करके गवर्नमेंट को पूछना चाहिए कि ये क्या करना चाहिए इसमें. थैंक यू.
Thank you, sir. And there is a question in the chat section. How high mountain plastic pollution will be included into upcoming UN plastic treaty and get addressed, since until we clean upstream, downstream cannot be cleaned.
Sorry, I'm not very clear what is this question trying to ask.
Priya, repeat the question because I also unable
how
to...
the high mountain plastic pollution will be included into upcoming UN plastic treaty and get addressed, since we clean until we clean upstream, downstream, and which cannot be cleaned. This is the question that's written.
Maybe you can unmute and ask Ramcharitra ji if you're here.
Yes, I can.
Yes, please.
Actually, I know the plastic treaty is starting from marine pollution, and now it is overall plastic. pollution. But there are a specific ecosystem which is much fragile, unique in many ways, and that has to be protected. And there are a number of studies showing that microplastic has been found in a snow sample, the stream water sample collected over 8,400 meters from the high mountain, even Mount Everest balcony area. So microplastic is everywhere. So, and then there is a issue of until and unless you clean the high mountain, the downstream, which is the marine, ultimately the aim of the convention, upcoming convention, cannot be cleaned. So is there any way and how we, at least mountainous country, can raise this issue to be specifically included by word? By word, I mean like at least there should be 3 or 4 words, high mountain plastic pollution. So that is my concern, and even urge all of you, how we can advocate for that collectively to be included in the treaties. Until and unless it is included, since I have the bad experience with the Mercury Convention, one of the major source area has not been there by word, and we are facing a lot of problem to be recognized and giving the due attention for that. So I am very much concerned how we can include those high mountain plastic pollution by word in the treaty text.
Okay, I can try to answer it from my perspective, and I think then you can please jump in. So the treaty is, of course, combating plastic pollution, including in the marine environment, through a comprehensive approach, which I think marine environment comes in because plastic eventually ends up in the marine environment, right? Like even from the mountains, it ends up, and that's where it breaks down often under the impact of sun, and of course become microplastics and chemical leaching happen. In reality, I personally found that in the conversations, I think a lot of times people forgot its marine environment. I think a lot of time we did not, I mean, if you look at how the objectives are designed, it does not really even talk about marine wildlife. I think nobody spoke about wildlife there, which was very interesting because the recognition of plastic as a problem came through wildlife, right? It came through marine wildlife. It came through the likes of turtles. It became visible through that. But if you look at the demands that civil society are pressing, and production cuts and chemicals phase out and transparency is the main push that we are trying to do. So instead of looking at plastic as a disposal downstream problem, we are pushing for an upstream approach. And if you look at if you push the solutions and if you push the focus upstream, you are actually trying to close the tap effectively. And you're trying to close the tap on production. You are essentially stopping the littering to happen, which is what you're talking about. Like it becomes a pollution. And of course, when it is disposed on land versus it being disposed in mountains and falling into sea, the interaction that the material as a chemical has with the environment is different. And I understand there are different scientific studies on that. But if you're focusing on upstream solution, which is why we need upstream, that's where environmental justice and social justice for all of us will happen, and including the waste pickers and workers are talking about upstream solution and talking about bans. We don't want recycling to continue. We don't want it to become like 50 years down the line. We don't want to be even thinking about it because we know that it is an interim solution. So that is my understanding. I don't think the plastic treaty is not looking at mountains, is not looking at different other or the forest or different other ecosystem. I think we haven't talked about it enough, but something that comes to my mind is looking at plastics and looking at the other existing convention, the Convention on Biological Diversity, for example, because we have to recognize plastic is also a biodiversity problem, right? Like how it impacts biodiversity intersects there is again a problem, which is kind of connecting to my mountainous region as well. So that's what I would say, that the idea is it covers all ecosystem. We can't have different treaties for different ecosystem. That's not going to work. That's just going to be industry being happy if we do that. So over to you, Maheshji.
Like
Agree with
Sagarmatha,
Arpita, but I have light mode this thing. You talking about the impact of plastic on the mountain, but now the waste, it's became a mountain itself. So it's another thing. Yeah. Thank you.
like there are a specific place like Mount Everest is the World Heritage Site, is the world peak, highest peak of the world also, and it has the unique feature. And there is a nexus actually. Until the reason I try to exclusively include is anyway, like upstream should be cleaned for the downstream cleanup. Until and unless we clean upstream, how could the downstream can be cleaned? Since it is always like perpetual feeding of the source of the pollution. So that is my concern, along with the like, and there are many studies even for Mount Everest. Even I was looking for the similar studies in European. So Alps, even Alps has the same, which is the highest mountain in the Europe, have the same kind of issue of microplastic in even in European mountains. So at least the mountainous countries should come together and raise this kind of things, so that the whole life cycle, not in terms of the chemicals or from production to in use of the plastic, but also the whole life cycle from tail to bottom. But like top to bottom, it has to be cleaned.
Well, rightly said, sir. Uh, but uh, we are having a really good discussion, but unfortunately, we have to close the session now because it's time. Thank you everyone for being here and for supporting us in our efforts. And we hope that we'll see you soon with another discussion. Thank you, Arpita ma'am. Thank you, Mahesh sir. And I'll close the session. Thank you, everyone. And you also can leave. Thank you.